Hey, hello, what's up, and welcome into this edition of Geek Garage Goes to the Movies. I'm Ted, and joining me as always is David. What's up, David?
Hello, how are you?
Good. I know I'm incredibly excited for this episode. I think it's safe to say that you are too, David.
Sure.
You are excited,
Yeah.
That's good, because we're going to cover the latest, the 9th movie from Quentin Tarantino, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Now, a lot has been said about this movie, some of it good, some of it bad. Some of the reviews have been worth your time, and some of them have not. Like this one. I can tell you right now, this ain't going to be worth your time. But we're going to do it regardless. So before we start, a couple of quick notes. As always, this podcast will be spoiler heavy. So
Yes.
please keep that in mind if you have not seen the film yet.
Or if you don't care about spoilers. then
Right,
listen
or
in.
if you don't plan to see the film, it's not going to matter that we spoil it. But if it's something that you're looking forward to and you haven't seen it yet, we are going to talk about a lot of the major plot points. So just keep that in mind.
Yep.
As always, we encourage you to see the film first and then come back and listen to it. Additionally, as weird as this may sound, a little knowledge of 1969 Los Angeles would be beneficial before you see the movie.
Indeed.
In particular, some info surrounding the Manson family. Anyway, I'm ready. David's ready. We hope you're ready. So let's go.
Let's do it.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
All right, Ted, you ready to talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
Absolutely, yes.
Awesome. So I think we're going to do some just initial surface level thoughts before we do a deep dive. That okay with you?
Yes.
Cool. Listeners, I hope that's all right with you because
Doesn't
that's
matter.
what we're
They're not
doing.
Here. They're not here to have an opinion.
Right,
So
yeah,
fast
exactly.
forward if you don't like it.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I'll go first.
Sure.
So I love this movie. I loved it for a lot of the reasons that a lot of other people have loved this movie or liked this movie, and I also enjoy it for a lot of reasons that haven't been mentioned. One of the main reasons, and I know that you will echo this, is because it's reminiscent of a few of Tarantino's early works like Pulp Fiction and mainly Jackie Brown. The whole how the story is propelled, how it's set up, how it slowly builds over time. It's very reminiscent of those kinds of his films, and I derived a lot of enjoyment out of how the movie unfolded like that. I also really enjoyed the actors' performances. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know. Just overall, I thought it was awesome. I haven't done an official ranking of all of Tarantino's works yet, with this one now included, but I know it probably falls pretty high on the list. With this being his 9th work, I'd say it falls within the top 5 of his 9 for me. So it does rank pretty high up there. Sorry. I know that's not a lot of initial thoughts and really clearly thought out, but yeah, I'll go ahead and pass it to you. So then we can go deep dive.
Yeah, so I agree. I fucking loved this movie. This is the most fun I've had at the... Well, I was going to say this is the most fun I had at the movies this year. Then I remember we saw John Wick like 4 times. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit and say that this is in the running for the most fun I had at the movies this year.
Right.
The opening night for Wick that's going to be a tough one to beat. But
yeah,
very different kind of enjoyment, I guess. Anyway, I did thoroughly enjoy this movie. I'll get into some of the deeper reasons why, like you said. It was just a fun fucking movie. I don't know what else to really say other than that. It was just super enjoyable. It hit a lot of the buttons of stuff that I like. So like late 60s aesthetics, late 60s Hollywood, like all the cowboy shows that like I watched when I was a kid.
Right.
I wasn't alive in the 60s, the 50s and 60s, of course, but a lot of stuff that I watched on like TV Land.
Right.
It just hit a lot of those buttons for me. And it had a lot of really great performances in it, which I definitely want to talk more about. But yeah, this one just it hit the spot.
Yeah. I was going to say, you mentioned kind of nailing that really late 60s vibe. One thing that I read about this movie is that they actually filmed in a couple locations, like diners, or a diner. I can't remember what scene it is, but I've heard it mentioned several times that this diner really hasn't changed since it came about in like the 50s and 60s.
Right.
So that they basically didn't have to do anything to make this diner look like it was straight out of 1969.
Right.
Is because it hasn't changed. So I thought that being able to film at actual locations like that where they didn't have to do much tweaking or any tweaking was really cool. So yeah, I'll definitely echo the aesthetic portion of 1969 Hollywood, that whole grind.
For sure.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said in my kind of little intro, I think that if you enjoyed some of Tarantino's early works like Jackie Brown and Pulp Fiction, then you'll really get a kick out of this, because a lot of what pushed the story forward in this movie is kind of dissimilar from how the story was pushed forward in like Inglourious Bastards or Kill Bill, where in those movies there's a very clear objective, and for the most part you kind of know where things are going. Like in Kill Bill, it's in the title, she's going to kill Bill.
It's a much more straightforward sort of story arc.
Right, but with this, with Once Upon a Time, it's not like you have no idea where it's going, but it's pretty ambiguous. Granted, that could be a little bit of perspective on my part, because like you said in the intro, where a working knowledge of the Manson family in 1969 Hollywood is definitely suggested. I didn't have much of that going into, and I know we discussed this, so it kind of hindered my overall first experience of the movie. But going back and doing a little bit of research on the Manson family and all that, it definitely made more sense going forward. But like I was saying, I genuinely enjoyed how the story of this movie was propelled, how it kind of kept you guessing a little bit, and it kind of felt very flowy, where things were just kind of happening and you were just enjoying the ride.
It's much more of a slice of life type movie, or a day in the life type movie. Whereas, like you said, like Inglourious Bastards is a good example, where it's definitely like a men on a mission movie.
Yeah.
For a big chunk of it, or the narrative is very clear. Like Shoshana's story arc is very clear. The Bastards story arc is very clear.
Right.
And sort of set in motion. Point A leads to point B, leads to point C, etc. Whereas this one is definitely kind of, like you said, a little more free flowing. It doesn't have that really rigid storyline. It's just kind of like two guys doing stuff for large portions of the movie, which is not a knock at all. That's a legitimate like.
And then the beautiful
technique.
Margot Robbie watching herself
crushing it
in the movie theater, and that whole scene was completely endearing.
I got a lot of thoughts on that. We'll get to.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, that's. I kind of had just a little bit to say about that. A lot of what's in my notes is just incoherent rambling, much like just the
every
rest
other
of,
episode we've done,
or just every aspect of my life. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, like I said, I enjoyed. I felt like the storyline and how it progressed in this movie was a nice breath of fresh air for both Tarantino and just movies in general. Where, you made mention of I think it was someone's tweet where they said it was nice to go into a movie this summer where you didn't need a working knowledge of a franchise. Yeah,
and I wish I could remember and give credit to who tweeted that originally. It was a tweet I saw. I tried to go back and find it, and I couldn't find it, but
if we find it, we'll put it in the notes in the episode description.
But just to kind of paraphrase what they were saying, it was like it was just nice to go into a theater and not have to have like a working knowledge of the last 21 Marvel movies, for example,
right?
Or like know about Godzilla or whatever, or what happened in the first 2 John Wick movies or something like that. And while I liked the Godzilla, King of the Monsters, and John Wick 3, like I definitely also understood that where. In a summer dominated by sequels, in a medium increasingly dominated by sequels and adaptations. It was just like, it was nice to go in and not need to know a lot about this, because it's just like you could just experience this movie. And like I said in the intro, and you kind of echoed, it does help to have a little bit of knowledge of some of what's going on.
Yeah,
but it doesn't.
But it's not necessary.
It's not necessary.
Like
you
I
don't-
still fucking love this movie, and I knew little to nothing about Charles Manson and
Right.
the Manson family, and like I said, I still fucking love this movie.
Yeah. So that was just, and I was like, man, I agree with that. Interestingly, this is the first original IP for the movies, at least, that crossed the $100 million mark. Everything else that's crossed $100 million domestically has been, or maybe it wasn't domestically, maybe it's just $100 million in general, but everything else that's reached that milestone this year has been a sequel or an adaptation of an existing work.
Which definitely makes sense from a financial standpoint. Those are the movies that tend to make the money, but they're also the most prevalent movies just out there, period. Is, you know, people want to, movie makers, you know, the ones that write the checks, they want to bank on something that's going to make money. And while that makes fiscal sense,
Business decisions.
yeah, you know, it's nice to see something like this and it being pulled off, you know, very well.
Sure.
So
The first thing I want to hit on is the title, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's evocative of a few different things. Of course, Sergio Leone had he had two movies that started with Once Upon a Time in. He had Once Upon a Time in Mexico, and then Once Upon a Time in America. Both excellent movies, as is his whole filmography, really. But
Right.
the other thing it's evocative of is a fairy tale.
yeah,
Right? There was this castle once upon a time, or whatever, what have you. And ultimately, this film is a fairy tale of sorts. It's an alternate history, definitely, and an exaggerated reality. All of the quote-unquote good guys win, get their happy ending, live happily ever after, and the bad guys, the evil, are defeated. In this case, it's the Manson family.
right.
But the protagonists really walk, or at least the main two, Cliff and Rick, really walk this tightrope, and you kind of have to think, like, are they actually good guys? Right? They're both really xenophobic. There's the line that it really fucking cracked me up, and I think about this at least once a day since seeing it, where they're in the parking lot and Cliff says, "Don't cry in front of the Mexicans."
Right.
And that just fucking, like, as a Latino person, that hit my funny bone and just did not stop. I fucking almost pissed in the theater. I was laughing at that so hard.
And no one would have thought twice about it because everyone else was pissing themselves laughing.
Yeah, and it was just the delivery where he was like, "Don't cry in front of the fucking Mexicans."
Right.
You know, it's just so funny. But there's a sort of xenophobia that runs, you know, throughout the whole course of the movie with them, and they have this really intense dislike of the new or the others. In this case, hippies, particularly Rick.
Right.
He has a couple of different parts where he's just like, "These fucking hippies, man," you know. Also, Cliff may have killed his wife.
That is a distinct possibility.
It's never really said for certain.
Right.
There's a quick flashback where they're on a boat. He and his wife are on a boat arguing, and he has a spear gun.
Right.
And it just kind of cuts, and it doesn't say for sure. There are definitely characters in the movie that believe it. So it's kind of like it's a rumor, I guess, within the universe of the movie, and it's kind of up in the air. Honestly, it could go either way.
Yeah.
I haven't really decided which side of the fence I came down on with regards to that.
Yeah, it seemed like one of those things. Like they brought it up the first time you hear about it. It kind of comes off like a shock factor kind of thing.
It comes out of nowhere.
Right, where you're like, he killed his fucking wife, man, and then you're like, whoa, dude's like
Right.
walking around, he's a free man and he killed his wife, but then like they put it, okay, I say quote unquote put it in perspective where you actually get some context. You see them, you know, on a boat, but you really don't know what happened, and you're kind of led to believe that no one really knows the full truth, and that like maybe she went overboard,
Right.
and he just neglected to help her. I don't know.
Like I said, it leaves it fairly open ended. It's just one of those things where like it gives his character some complexity,
Right.
and it made me really think like, man, he's pretty much the coolest motherfucker that's ever walked the earth as portrayed in this film.
Right.
But then, like, you have to kind of wrangle with this, which if he did, that really changes things.
It certainly doesn't make Bruce Lee seem too bad of a guy in this movie.
We'll come to that. That was a big thing as well.
Right.
My main point of this is, like, looking at like the xenophobia and some of the things like that. If we look at that with modern sensibilities, it's super disconcerting. Within the context of the movie and these being two, fairly, at least Rick is fairly well-to-do white guys in 1969 Hollywood. Mm-hmm. While I'm not saying it's okay to be this way, it fits. Like,
right.
That's probably how these guys would have actually been were they real people.
Yeah, I think the hippie hatred culture was a pretty prevalent one amongst prejudices in that era.
To be fair, it's okay to hate hippies. It's okay.
I mean, I was just throwing it out there.
It's okay.
From what I've learned and researched and have talked to my parents about, it seemed that was
it's okay to hate
that
hippies.
was the case.
It's okay.
All right, moving forward.
What else you got?
I mean, I fucking love the acting performances. This might be my favorite out of the entire movie is the actual performances, other than how the story unfolds. I love the back and forth, like you said, with Brad Pitt's character and DiCaprio's character. I thought that they mesh really well. I thought it was really cool to see two Tarantino film alums come together in one film. I thought that was really cool. And we discussed this a little bit off air, but I thought it was really cool how well they both played their respective roles. That Cliff was so perfectly fine with like playing second fiddle to what's DiCaprio's character? Rick, yeah. He was so fine with playing, backup to him, being like his stuntman in the professional world, but also kind of in real life. I thought that was, really cool how he understood, not like necessarily depressingly accepted the fact that he was not going to amount to someone famous. He was okay with being, that guy.
Yeah, their relationship actually was really interesting. That's one of the notes I had, because it stays true throughout the whole film. There's not a moment where like they have the quote unquote dark night of the soul where they're like, we're not friends anymore.
Right.
Like they stay.
Which is something that I was very weary and afraid of, that it was going to happen. Mm-hmm. Just, how those things, those typical, film moments happen, and you're just like, oh, fucking here it comes. So.
Right. So not only do they stay friends, but the relationship dynamic stays true through the end. Cliff does all the heavy lifting as the stuntman, while Rick is the star, gets a lot of the credit. So while Cliff's doing all the hard shit, Rick's just chilling, hanging out, but he's the famous one at the end of the day. Right. The ending plays out this way as well. So while Rick is relaxing in his pool, Cliff is beating the bejesus out of the Manson family
with a dog food can,
right.
and with his bare fist,
and then slamming face into the wall repeatedly.
Yes.
In what is, shockingly to say, maybe the most gratuitous scene of violence in Tarantino's filmography.
Right.
And that's fucking saying something.
Uh-huh.
But in the end, though,
it brought me right back to the Bear Jew scene, where it's just clear, unadulterated, unfiltered violence.
Yeah.
Just right there, right in front of your face, and you're just like, well, that happens.
Yeah. But if you think about it, Cliff does all the heavy lifting, but Rick has the best scene where he comes out with a flamethrower.
Right.
So it stays true right to the end.
Yeah.
That flamethrower actually is the best use of Chekhov's gun ever, in my opinion.
What is Chekhov's gun? Is that a film term?
It's a trope, right? So Chekhov's gun is if you see a gun in a film, it will be used later. It doesn't have to be a gun. It's called Chekhov's gun because it's about a gun, but it could be any other item. Really,
Gotcha.
Right. In this case, you see, of course, the flashback to the film he starred in where he used the flamethrower.
Right.
Then later you actually see the flamethrower in the corner of his shed or whatever out by the pool.
Right, yeah.
So, and then he comes out with, man, when he came out with that fucking thing strapped to his back, the theater erupted. It was like watching.
I know.
It was just joy. It was so, which sounds kind of weird to say. We just talked about how it was like the most violent part of Tarantino.
And he just lit this girl on fire.
Right, he just lit this woman on fire in his fucking pool. That's insane. But everybody was just like, I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. It probably says something bad about us as people. But it was awesome. I don't know. I don't know what else to say, really.
I think, well, maybe it does, but clearly this movie has several moments like that where there were terrible things done by terrible people, or, terrible things done by, people who act terrible sometimes, and you're meant to kind of laugh about it because it is, a little campy and over the top. And
yeah, my philosophy on anything like that is, as long as you understand something that's fake versus real, like fake violence can be enjoyable, like horror movie violence can be kind of cornball and enjoyable. This I thought was hysterical. Real violence isn't funny,
right?
So I think as long as you try to approach it with a healthy view like that, I don't want to say it's probably okay, but it's probably okay.
Right? Yeah, makes sense.
I agree with you 100% about the acting. I think this is Leo's best performance in a film. I think this is, if not Pitt's best, it's definitely his coolest. It's up there with Moneyball for me. I think that was the one where a lot of people were like, "Holy shit, Brad Pitt can kind of act," and I've been like, and I was just like, "Yeah."
If you watch movies, you would know that.
If you ever watched him in a movie that he gave a shit in and wasn't just cast because he's, I don't know, Brad fucking Pitt,
right?
You might have known
if you saw something other than Troy.
Oh, Troy. He tried. God bless him. But,
all right.
I think the two people that really stole the movie. Okay, so let me back up. DiCaprio and Pitt are throwing heat, right? They're throwing just full on, like, they're pushing, bottom of the eighth, no. Okay,
right.
They're throwing heat. Margot Robbie was fucking transcendent.
She sank their battleship.
She came out and blew them completely off the screen. I agree with you. The longest segment of hers, I guess, where it starts with her going to buy the book. She picks up the hippie, goes to buy the book, and then goes across the street and watches the movie that Sharon Tate actually stars in.
Right.
And, that was probably the best stretch of the movie. Mm-hmm. She is just blowing the doors off the fucking place. And there was a lot of talk, particularly after, I think it was Cannes that this debuted at.
Yeah.
Where it was like, why does she only have 12 lines? And I feel like, so I'm of two opinions on this. First, if that's the way you're interacting with art, you fucking failed somewhere.
Right.
Particularly for the notoriously visual medium of film. Mm-hmm. That's my big picture take. My smaller, more direct take about Robbie's performance in particular is that you missed the fucking point if you were pissed off that she didn't talk enough.
Right.
Because she didn't need to. She acted with her face, her eyes. Like, she fucking lights up the screen. You can feel the joy that she had as the people in the theater around her cheered and laughed at the scenes of Sharon Tate in the movie. And I can't remember the film they showed that were like the funny parts that they were laughing at. She's just like thrilled because it's like her first taste of fame, basically.
Yeah.
And she's just like so happy that people like her performance. Mm. I don't need her to be like, I'm happy that people like my performance as a line of dialogue.
Right. It's less is more.
Right. Show, don't tell.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. What I don't understand is why people don't understand that, but they totally get how Tom Hardy acts with his face, which is also true. Like, he played Bane, he played whatever character that is in Dunkirk, he played a bunch of other characters where he and his role in Mad Max Fury Road, where he had his face covered
He had
for most of
literally a cage on his face for a large chunk of that movie.
Right, and the man can act with a lot of his face covered. So why is it so fucking hard for people to understand that having the most lines in a goddamn movie doesn't make you, the better actor or gives you more opportunity to prove yourself a better actor than the other actors in the movie?
Now, to be fair to people making that criticism, even though, like I said, they have failed miserably and should really reconsider how they take in and assess art, I think there is a legitimate conversation to be made about things like representation or like how things are portrayed. Sure. But to me, that's a different discussion than why did Margot Robbie only say 12 lines in this movie? That's fucking dumb.
Right.
That's just dumb. The other person that I think really tried her best to steal the movie and may have just about succeeded was Margaret Qualley, who played Pussycat, one of the Manson family.
Yep.
That Pitt picks up and takes back to Spawn Ranch.
Her personality is so palpable.
Yeah. We were talking about this off air, and I was like, I mentioned the same thing I said a few minutes ago. Like, I think this may be Pitt's best performance. If it's not, it's in the discussion at the very least. And she's just blowing him off the screen.
Right.
In their scene together.
Yeah.
I agree 100% about her emotions being palpable, where she's just like so thrilled that he picks her up.
Right.
And then immediately on a dime, she turns when the cops drive by and she's like, fucking pigs! Like,
right.
I was like, oh, it's real.
Yeah. She very much felt like that kind of person that you would have in your life that you could put up with like for a day every quarter of the year.
Like 4 times a year, that's the best day you have. And
right.
the rest of the time,
and
you're
it's
like,
just fucking exhausting.
Right, but the rest of the time, because I just don't have it in me.
Right. And it's not like to any fault of her own. She's just so happy. Like, she'd give you diabetes.
I was gonna say, like, it's not a knock on her performance at all. It's just like it's all the way up to 100, but in a way that it's not like overacting or campy.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I said, you could just really feel the hatred she had to the cops, the joy that she felt, and the scene in the trailer where she's like, "Charlie's really gonna dig you, man."
Right.
Talking to Cliff. It's just like that was such a good scene. She just like oozes sensuality and like she just seems like a cool ass person.
Right.
And then she flips, of course, on Cliff, and it's just like, but even before that, like the fear in her eyes, when he's like walking up to the house on Spawn Ranch trying to check on his friend George.
Right.
And she's just like, it does the close up on her face. She's like biting her lip and she looks like really anxious and afraid. And I was just like, oh man, she just is like,
I know.
Bottom of the ninth, fucking grand slam, game's over, get out. You know?
Yeah, for sure. I am definitely going to earmark this actress. Do you know her name?
Margaret Qualley.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very excited to see where the rest of her career takes her. I'll definitely be following.
Like
her
I said,
for
everybody in
films.
this movie brings it.
Yeah.
Her and Margot Robbie, in my opinion, brought it the hardest.
Yeah, for sure. So one thing you kind of touched on on Spawn Ranch, for just in passing a second ago. That's actually one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie because just not to keep beating a dead horse with this whole like my favorite is the the unfolding of the plot and blah blah blah, but I really feel like this is the point where the movie starts to ramp up and gain a little bit of traction and direction and really fully develop. And you start to get a real sense of just everything that's going on.
Right.
And especially that trademark Tarantino tension. I'm
so glad you brought that up because one of the things I thought, like, I just had this impending sense of dread.
Right.
As that scene built.
I was like, someone is going to get fucked.
I was ready.
Right
I was like, I'm about to watch Brad Pitt be murdered by the Manson family in George Spawn's kitchen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And Tarantino completely fucking subverted it on me.
I know.
When he goes in and he's just like, George is this decrepit old man laying in bed, and he's like, George, and I'm just like, George's dead, dog. You need to get the fuck up out of there.
Tarantino, he played the world's greatest bitch you thought moment.
No, but like really, I was just like, oh man, I was waiting for, as he walked deeper into Spawn's bedroom.
Right.
I was just waiting for the camera to pan around to be like at his front, and then I was just like waiting for one of the Manson family to be there with a knife, and I was just like, oh dog, it ain't got to be like this.
Yeah. Where or maybe what's her name? I was about to say Kitty. It's Pussy, right?
Pussycat.
Yeah, Pussycat. I was just waiting for her to be like, yeah, I sat on his face too much earlier today, and I suffocated him with my vagina.
It was actually Squeaky that was sleeping with him, both in the film and in real life. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. Either way.
And then he goes up and finally wakes him up, and George is like, "What the fuck do you want?" And it's Bruce Dern just being like this bitchy old man. It was so. I was just like, "Oh, Quentin, you motherfucker!"
Right.
You know?
Yeah. No, that was pretty great. And then and the scene it just ends by him beating the shit out of some guy that clearly needs a dental plan.
Yeah, driving off. What another thing that's really interesting about that scene is like the juxtaposition between it and the scenes that Leo DiCaprio as Rick are going through.
Right.
Where Rick is playing a TV cowboy.
Mm-hmm.
Cliff is basically living the TV cowboy life. Like he's actually having the cowboy moment where he's walking up to Spawn's house.
That's a great point. And
then he's coming back, and like the whole family is staring at him, and just like I was like, oh. And I have some more notes on things like that. But
that's a cool parallel. I'm glad that you drew that one and brought it to my attention here, because the one that I drew the most was the not necessarily ending, but the tailoring off of DiCaprio's career versus Margot Robbie playing as Sharon Tate's career taking off, and how those were kind of, it was jumping around clearly in the movie between kind of the three of them, but there was a period where it felt like it was bouncing back and forth between the two of them, and you could clearly see these, I don't know if parallel is the right word, but this cross of his career going down and her career going up, and just the feelings that come with that, and dealing with that kind of. Decline in success and gaining success.
Right. I actually have some other notes about some similar things. So Tarantino gets a bad rap by a lot of people. I think it's increasingly the sort of in or cool thing to dislike Tarantino. And I mean, some of this bad rap I think is justifiable. The dude likes feet. And, everybody's got their thing. And this movie, it's like he read all the people on the internet saying he liked feet, so he threw a bunch of them in there.
Right.
And while that doesn't really bother me, I don't find it that disconcerting. It's kind of weird.
I'll give him that. It's kind of innocuous.
That's also true. It could be a lot worse, what his quote-unquote thing could be.
Right.
But he also has things that I don't think he gets enough credit for. So, for example, there's a very excellent bit of foreshadowing from Rick.
Okay.
At one point, towards the beginning, where he's like, I'm on the downswing, and who the fuck I got living next to me? Roman Polanski, who I think he just won the Oscar at the point that this movie takes place.
Right, Rosemary's Baby?
Yeah, and he's like, and fucking Sharon Tate, they're on the up, and I'm the old fucker living here,
And he's got his face on this big-ass portrait painted, like,
in his driveway. Yeah. But what he says is like, man, I'm one like Polanski pool party away from being a big star again. You know how the film ends? With him in the pool and then getting invited up to Polanski's house after they kill the Manson family.
Yeah. That was a badass ending.
It was. God damn it, it was.
I mean, it was, and tying back to what you said in the beginning about this kind of being a fairy tale, is it had a very fairy tale like ending,
right? Like
where
I said,
instead of it being this big climactic thing, where I mean, granted, it did have a climactic ending to an extent where towards the end of the movie things kind of exploded explosively, for lack of better words, but the ending sequence of him talking to what is Emil Hirsch's character?
J.C. Bryn.
Thank you. Talking to him, and it just eases off. Like the movie just kind of eases out,
and then it does that kind of classic like
camera
pans up,
Yeah.
and then the title pops up, and I was like, man, this is fucking perfect, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
But there's that. Pacino's character, the producer, I can't remember the character's name, but he says to Rick towards the beginning when he's interviewing him, or when he's not interviewing him, but talking to him in the restaurant, and he's like, look, here's what your role is, basically. You keep getting work in pilots as the heavy. You're the familiar face that used to be the guy that everybody knows and recognizes. You come in, bring legitimacy to the new guy who kicks your ass as the new good guy, and you're the bad guy in the pilot, right? Later, Tarantino uses Bruce Lee's character in this film. Well, he uses the Bruce Lee character in this film in the same way to set up Cliff, where he shows that Cliff is a legitimate badass and a legitimate tough guy. Now, I know there's been a lot said about the Bruce Lee character and the Bruce Lee's portrayal in this film. It's not really my place to say anything about that. I understand that his daughter has a lot of negative things to say about it, and that's certainly, I understand. That said, it's still fiction, and I think that if anybody looks at this and it's like, that's how Bruce Lee was, and some random stuntman could have kicked his ass, that person is not worth listening to.
Right. That person is either doesn't know who Bruce Lee is, or they're 12 years old and they have shitty parents because they didn't explain Bruce Lee well enough. And furthermore, if they're getting their information about Bruce Lee from their parents and not from the internet, they're using the internet wrong.
Yeah.
So
basically,
there's that. But one thing that I thought of, and I'm glad you touched on this, Bruce Lee thing. One thing that I thought of, it was either yesterday or earlier today, where you're right. People have been making this a little bit of an issue, and how Bruce Lee's character in the movie, he, in real life, he was a very caring individual, very, very cool, nice, very zen. He wasn't this, blowhard that he's kind of portrayed as, or I don't know. How would you describe his character? Very full of himself,
very arrogant in the film. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I guess I thought blowhard was a little bit synonymous with, full of themselves.
Yeah,
but
I mean, kind of.
Either way, anyways, I think one way to look at this is, instead of focusing on them trying to make Bruce Lee look like that, in comparison to how Cliff reacts to the fight and egging him on and wanting to fight Bruce Lee, and how that whole thing goes down, I think says a lot more about Cliff. And how you brought up earlier that the people in this movie have moments where they are clearly shitty people.
Right.
And so I think that's one way you can go about looking at this, is that it says more about Cliff's character than it does about Bruce Lee.
No, I think in a lot of ways that's a fair point. I know there was this weird pushback on the internet where people were like, "Oh, that's not what happened. It's a dream sequence," and that's kind of dumb. I think it's clearly meant to be representative of something that happened, but it's Cliff's memory, or it's like played as Cliff's memory. So it's probably fair to say there's some exaggeration going on.
Right.
I don't think anybody is ever. Memory's a tricky thing, and I don't think we're ever 100% honest with ourselves. And I'm kind of basing this on a couple of things. Number one, of course, the cocky, arrogant guy that is, looks like Brad Pitt. And is made out of abs, basically.
Right.
Is probably going to be a little full of himself.
Right.
And two, there's no way you could put that kind of dent in a car without another car.
Right.
So, that's just my opinion. I don't like to assume intent. I know Tarantino really, really worships at the altar of Bruce Lee, so... Clearly,
I mean, Uma Thurman in Kill Bill was... she wore his yellow... What was the movie? That he wore that infamous yellow suit with the black stripes. You named it earlier when I brought this up, and
was it Enter the Dragon?
It might have been.
I can't remember.
Did it have the word kill in it?
I don't know. He had Hands of Death. Game of Death, Enter the Dragon. I don't remember which one that is.
Either way, I mean, Bruce Lee was
But I mean,
the one who made
it's clearly a nod to Bruce Lee.
Right.
It's complicated, and like I said, I'm not really the person to talk about like how this, like what this portrayal does for his image or anything like that, because I mean, I don't know. His daughter has her opinion; she's certainly entitled to it.
Right.
And I think it's very fair. But anyway, moving on before we get canceled by the internet. Another really interesting point in Rick's book that he's reading on set. The character of Easy Breezy is the baddest guy around until he hurts his hip. Later, Cliff, who is the baddest guy around in the movie, gets stabbed in the hip. Yeah. These things don't get written by accident. Like, Tarantino knows what he's fucking doing, and he's a good writer.
Right.
You know, there's other examples of stuff like this in other movies. For example, in Inglourious Bastards, the character of Hans Landa says, the Führer brought me down out of my nice home in the Alps, which are, of course, mountains in Switzerland and Germany, and in that section of Europe. And Aldo Rain says he came out of the mountains in East Tennessee. Like, he mirrors characters. This is not shit you do if you're an idiot.
Right.
Like, these are intentional things that good writers do. So like I said, I don't think he gets enough credit for that. I think a lot of people just look at Tarantino and like, oh yeah, the guy with the violence and the pop culture references. And it's like, he hasn't really been that for like 20 years.
Right.
You know, so that's just kind of like my little soapbox. I know earlier you talked about like your ranking of Tarantino movies and where this one would fit. I don't have like a quote unquote definitive Ted ranking necessarily. For a long time, I was like Jackie Brown is number one, and then everything else is fighting for second place. Then I saw Inglourious Bastards, and I was like, okay, depending on what day you ask, it's going to be one of these two movies in first place, and everything else fighting for second place.
Right.
And now I'm like, fuck, I got to really think about this. I think ultimately it kind of doesn't matter. It's all personal preference anyway. Whichever one you enjoy the most is going to be your favorite, and whichever one you don't is going to be your least favorite. It doesn't really matter. It's just a fun thing to think about. I like thinking about stupid shit like, you know, what were my favorite movies of this? You know, what do I take the most enjoyment out of? I'm a fucking loser. That's the kind of shit I do. Anyway, I have one last point, really. The Playboy Mansion scene had a couple of really good parts to it. Mm-hmm. Damian Lewis playing Steve McQueen was fucking inspired. Yeah. I was like, holy shit, that guy really looks like fucking Steve McQueen. But more than that, more than just the fact that he could he could win at least second place in a Steve McQueen lookalike contest. More so than that, he gives a speech that's really exposition. It's really expository and to an absurd degree.
But in a very Tarantino-esque kind of way.
But yeah, in a way that kind of works. It offers background on Tate, Polanski, and Sebring and their relationship. But also,
in that sense, I didn't mind it so much because I am very ignorant in that sense.
And I think it does help if you don't know a lot. Like, I didn't know that.
Right.
So I was like,
yeah,
that's interesting. Didn't. That makes the relationship between Sebring as sort of like a hanger-on in a lot of ways. And he even mentions that. He's like, he knows one day Polanski's going to fuck it up and he's going to be, Sebring is going to be there to pick up the pieces.
Right.
And I was like, okay, it's expository, but not all exposition is bad.
Right.
Not all exposition is created equal. But there's also kind of like a sadness to what he says, where he's like, you know, it kind of highlights the world is changing, that the situations are changing. Like in the past, Steve McQueen as the coolest motherfucker in the world, Sharon Tate would have been falling all over her fucking self. You know, Steve McQueen was fucking Steve McQueen.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, the Rolling Stones wrote a song called Starfucker, and Steve McQueen is heavily featured in it. Uh-huh. Like, he probably did all right for himself. But it highlights that the world is changing. So, like I said, in the past, she would have been swinging over him, but now he's like, I don't even have a fucking chance. I'm not at all what she's looking for.
Right.
You know, or by extension, you know, to extrapolate that, like what any of the newer generation, so to speak, is looking for. And that kind of, that's really the theme of the film. You know?
Yeah.
The world's changing. What's my place in it? You know, what is our place in it in a lot of ways. So expectations change, desires change. I was just like, man.
It's very fitting for where it sits in the film. It's not in the first 5 minutes, but it's definitely well in the beginning of the first act.
I'd say it's in the first third.
Yeah. And yeah, like you said, it does a really good job of setting a little bit of the tone for the movie overall.
To me, it was just a really nice encapsulation of what the movie was about overall. A lot of people have been like, oh, it's a love letter to Hollywood, it's a nostalgia trip, it's this and that. And yeah, it is all those things, but really at its core, like the theme of the movie is like the world is
Get
changing.
sad, motherfucker, because things are not staying the same for very long.
Well, I mean, I don't know. You could definitely argue that. It's all art is subjective.
Right.
It's what you take from it.
Yeah.
But like I said, like we said at the beginning, I fucking love this movie. I cannot wait to see it again. I'd really like to see it on film. I know
on 35 millimeter.
It's playing a 35 millimeter at the Belcourt. Not just at the Belcourt, a lot of theaters nationwide that are equipped to run film. It's playing in 35 millimeter for. I know at the Belcourt, at least, it's pretty much for the duration of the regular run in theaters.
Okay.
Some other places, it may be a more limited thing. I don't know. The first time we saw it on opening night, it was on a digital projection, which, I mean, that's most movies now. And it looked good, but film just looks better, just the way vinyl sounds better, you know, because I'm a snob, basically. But I can't wait to see it again. It's definitely...
Really hoping that they end up doing that extended release that Tarantino was talking about.
Yeah, so they did this with The Hateful Eight, where they did like I don't think it was the Roadshow version. I think the Roadshow version is the one that they showed in theaters with an intermission.
Yeah.
But this one is like
broken up episodically
into 4 episodes, and it's like 4 hours long or very close to that.
Yes, it's very long.
They talked about wanting to do that with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and yeah, I'd watch a 4-hour cut of this movie in a fucking heartbeat.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested in that. Very interested in that.
Yeah, it would be fun to see it done with this movie, because I feel like cutting it episodically would be really fun, since that is kind of how it's paced anyways.
I definitely agree. So, like you could do that first day of them in like the restaurant and then driving home. Like that's a solid episode.
Right.
You know, Sharon Tate, Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate picking up the hippie, driving, getting the book, seeing the movie, and then coming back. That's a solid episode.
Right.
You know,
it would be awesome to see like just one episode, just her.
Oh yeah, and I mean, we said it. She was throwing fucking heat in a movie full of people throwing heat.
Right.
You know, it's no surprise that she's a good actress. It's not like a surprise that she's good in the movie, but like I said, she just kicked the shit out of everybody basically, performance wise.
Yeah, her performance was definitely great, but her performance in Wolf of Wall Street will always have a close place in my heart. Not just because she's, you know, quite attractive in that role, but I mean, she's attractive in every role, but that, I don't know, for some reason I love that movie. I'm not sure. I mean, it's a fun movie to live vicariously through, because it's so crazy and over the top. Yeah. And we're totally getting off subject now. A little bit. Because
we'll do a Wolf of Wall Street pod. I want to do a Scorsese pod because I have a lot of thoughts. Yeah. I fucking love Scorsese. Yeah. We'll get there. Right. Put a pin in that, listeners. For sure. None of you that give a shit about what my opinions on Martin Scorsese's filmography are. Right. You're all just like, when are you going to get to the new Marvel movie?
Hey, we should make Mac like our 5th listener. We should convince him to listen to the podcast, because
I think Mac would enjoy it. Mac and I get along. Right. The one time we've ever spoken.
Yeah. So Mac, if you happen to be listening, or like if I've somehow convinced you to listen, not that you wouldn't, because you're, you know, a good friend of ours, and a fun person to talk to movies with, and in fact you've been on the fucking podcast before, but you know, being on a podcast doesn't necessarily mean that you also listen.
This is quality content and definitely what the people care about.
Yeah, for sure. You want to get to the shit that doesn't suck?
We do. I want to do a new segment. Assuming you don't have any more thoughts other than Once Upon a Time in Hollywood rules, go see it.
It does rule, and you should definitely go see it.
Okay. A couple of quick hits. A new segment that we'll call Quick Hits. We're professionals. We actually had some market research about that, and we decided that was the best name. It's definitely not because I just said it out loud and was like, fuck it, that's good enough. So it's tangentially related to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Of course, Margot Robbie is in the new Birds of Prey movie that's filming now. That is the quasi-sequel to Suicide Squad, or maybe like a spiritual successor of sorts. She plays Harley Quinn. It's based in the DC universe. I can't remember who else is in it. But she's playing Harley Quinn again.
Yeah, I know Poison Ivy is supposed to be in it, but I can't remember who's...
I can't remember. And I want to say Black Canary is the third member of the Birds of Prey. It's been a long time since I read any comics, really. But it just got announced today that John Wick director Chad Stahelski is going to be overseeing the action scenes in that movie, which just made that movie about 50 times better, in my opinion.
Indeed.
Yeah. So I was kind of looking forward to that, as is, just because, again, I like Margot Robbie. I like, Harley Quinn, and I like DC Comics, and the Birds of Prey are very cool. So I was already kind of looking forward to it. That really cemented the deal.
Looks like Mary Elizabeth Winstead plays... that's... she's credited as Helena Bertinelli / Huntress.
Okay, the Huntress. Yeah. Huntress is one of the Birds of Prey. Duh. All the comic fans are coming for me on the Twitter.
So I don't see anyone credited as Poison Ivy yet, which means that I either misspoke about her being in it, or
I thought she was going to be the villain, but
hasn't
I could be
been
wrong.
casted yet.
Well, I think it's already filming, I think. So
yeah,
maybe she's not... I don't know. Maybe that was for the new Batman movie they were talking about having Poison Ivy as a villain.
Ali Wong is apparently in this movie, which is
I'm good
kind
with
of
that.
cool.
Yeah,
she's funny as fuck.
Yeah. And then the cinematographer, Robert Richardson, cinematographer Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, is going to be the cinematographer for Venom 2. That's just weird. I mean, it's not
but
bad,
I dig it.
But it's cool. That movie's shaping up to be very, very interesting. Like Andy Serkis directing.
Really?
Yeah.
Has he directed anything?
I'm not sure.
I just know him as a great
right, like mocap and
yeah,
facial
mocap actor, and yeah,
he is a great actor for sure.
Yeah,
I don't know that he's directed anything, but I'm really interested because I think my thought process on this is like, as someone who has a very deep knowledge of what it takes to make CG acting look good, I'm very interested to see his take on a movie that's going to rely heavily on CG.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in that. That's a great cinematographer they just got. So I'm really kind of curious to see how this shapes out. Yeah. Those are the only two I have, because this was something that we literally just decided to do on the fly because we're professionals.
Right.
And that's the kind of shit our audience of no one expects.
Exactly.
Finally, our last segment, the recurring segment that we always have, shit that doesn't suck. David, do you want to go first?
I just rewatched The Dark Knight Rises because they didn't just recently add The Dark Knight to Netflix. It's been on there for a while now, but I just decided to rewatch that the other day, and then since I rewatched The Dark Knight, I figured I'd rewatch Dark Knight Rises because we are currently out of internet, so I'm going through all our old DVDs and rewatching whatever we have on Blu-ray, and I fucking love that movie. I know we both discussed off air that it is definitely not without its problems, but it is a beautiful movie to watch.
I think 50% of that movie is amazing, particularly the cinematography. It is a beautiful movie, I agree. And then like 40 to 50% of that movie is catastrophically fucking terrible.
If you don't think too hard about the storyline and just pay attention to the cinematography and then Bane's speaking parts, then you're golden.
Yeah. I remember there was a lot of backlash. Backlash is maybe too strong of a word, but there was a lot of discussion about like Tom Hardy's performance and his voice.
Yeah, and those people can go get fucked.
I was like, dude, I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of... I can understand it being kind of hard to discern what he's saying in a theater full of people that are probably talking, but like watching it on DVD, like, it's fine.
As a person, and I know you can relate to this too, as a person who very much enjoys the subtitles being on, I was watching it last night without subtitles, and I could understand everything that he was saying. Yeah, in some parts, yeah, it's a little bit difficult to discern what he's saying, but it's not impossible.
Right. And I think he just has a lot of really good lines in that movie.
Yeah. The whole intro sequence of hijacking the plane that he willingly got on.
Yeah. That has one of my favorite lines where he's just like, perhaps he's wondering why you'd shoot a man before throwing him an offer.
Right.
What a fucking dickhead thing to say.
Right.
Like, you have to be pretty fucking sure yourself to bust a line like that.
Yeah, and you get a very clear understanding right off the bat of the kind of people that he has attracted to be his posse or his followers by the look on that guy's face when he says, "They expect one of us in the wreckage, brother," and he's
just like,
he's like, "All right, cool, yeah, I can be the dude that blows up in this canister."
I think my favorite part of that movie is where he goes, and I can't remember the other character's name, but it's the rich guy who hires him to basically destroy, and he's just like, I gave you riches and money, and he's like, and you think this gives you power over me?
Right, he
touches the back of his neck, and I was like, oh, you
puts his hand on his shoulders, like barely touching him. He's like, "Do you feel in control?
Do you feel in charge?
Right, do you feel in charge?"
I was like, that dude is gonna die.
Yeah, right, yeah, and he sure as fuck died.
He did. So yeah, I think half of that movie, like I said, is really good, and the other half is so bad that I don't ever want to watch it again.
You just gotta ignore those.
I just keep my finger on the fast forward button, basically,
right. or the mute button, whatever.
Yeah, I just kind of totally stole your thunder, but
nope. I mean, that turned into a cool little mini discussion about Dark Knight Rises.
We might do a Nolan trilogy pod. We should do that. I have a lot of thoughts on Nolan as a director. Mm-hmm. You'll find a recurring theme of me saying I have a lot of thoughts because I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of things.
Anyways, what's your shit that doesn't suck?
So my shit that doesn't suck. Is Agira, The Wrath of God.
Okay.
Which sounds badass and is badass. This is a 1972 movie from Werner Herzog, which a lot of people probably recognize that name. Mm-hmm. I think of late he's done a lot of documentaries. He did a really, really good one called Cave of Forgotten Dreams about 8 or 9 years ago that I believe won some pretty prestigious awards. It's very good. It was on Netflix for a long time. I'm not sure if it still is. This, Agira, The Wrath of God, is about... It's sort of like a fantasy version of a real event that happened. So the character of Agira was a real conquistador who was called El Loco, the crazy one, or the madman. He literally styled himself as the Wrath of God, the Prince of Freedom, and the King of Tierra Firme. You want to see a dude that's chewing up some scenery in a performance? Klaus Kinski, as Agira in this movie, is eating the scenery and asking for seconds.
Yeah.
He goes for it in a lot of ways.
All right.
It's a very good movie. It's a fucking beautiful movie. It's shot on location in South America.
Nice.
The cinematography is fucking astounding. The backdrops are gorgeous. The soundtrack is like this weird, like ethereal, like... I was going to say synth-driven. It's not like really synth-driven, like doom, doom, like you would think of like a bass-driven sound, but it's just like these ethereal synths, and it's just like kind of haunting, and the whole tone of the movie is kind of haunting as shit just gets worse and worse for this group, and Agira goes more and more insane. Great movie. It's available on Amazon Prime as well as the Criterion channel, which I'm sure David is sick of me talking about because I bring it up basically every time that we speak to one another. But it is legitimately the best $10, in my opinion, that you can spend on a streaming service. But I highly recommend that. I've been watching a lot of stuff on there, and I highly recommend the service. They still do not pay me, and they're probably not going to because they have professionals that write for them, and they're just like, who's this fucking idiot?
That would be pretty dope to get the Criterion streaming service as a sponsor, though.
Honestly, they don't even have to sponsor us. Just give me like 6 months free. I don't care at this point. You know what? They don't even do that. I will keep paying for it because it's worth it. It straight up is.
Yeah. We're not like one of those mindless, dumbass Instagram influencers. Give us free shit and we'll promote your hotel.
So I can promise this. I personally will never ask for a dime from anyone. My pride precludes that from ever happening. Mm-hmm. So you'll never hear me trying to pimp out a Patreon. I will never do a pitch for something that I don't like. It's just... I got too much pride for all that.
Yeah.
I realize I'm shooting myself in the foot, and in like a year when we have 10 listeners or something, I'm going to be like, next up, this podcast is brought to you by...
Wix!
Right.
Get yourself a website!
Right. Some dumb shit.
And here we are promoting shit that...
shit that does suck. Anyway, I think that's all I got. David, do you have any other thoughts?
I am fresh out of thoughts.
That's no surprise. So we
Thanks,
will
fucker.
Thanks,
Terry.
All right now. So we'll put a bow on this. As always, you can find us on pretty much every social media site by searching for Geek Garage Podcast.
Except Snapchat. We're not on that garbage.
We're definitely not cool enough for a Snapchat.
No.
I had a Snapchat once.
Yeah? How did
Yeah.
that feel?
So, funny story about the Snapchat. I was trying to send a snap, I believe, or video, whatever it's called. Yes, I sound like fucking 80 years old right now.
Whatever the kids are calling it.
Back when I had the internet, I was sending a snap, a bit of a hot and heavy snap to this person I was involved with at the time. I accidentally sent it to the Snap help team.
Did they respond back like, bro, wrong number?
They did not. Luckily for me, it was not anything too lewd.
Sure.
There was no dick pic involved.
Fuck.
It was about 13 seconds after I said that I was like, I'm done with Snapchat. Delete the app.
Delete it off your phone.
Deleted it off. I not only deleted it off my phone, I destroyed that phone. But anyway, that's the story of Ted having a snap. You can find us on pretty much any other social media site.
Yes.
Search for Geek Garage Podcast. We love interacting with the no fans we have. But if you do have opinions on the podcast, feel free to give us a shout on any of those social medias. Definitely like and subscribe to us on all the major podcast platforms. Google Play.
Leave us a rating and review, please.
Right, so Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify. I'm sure there are others that I don't know about, but definitely leave us a review. If you're going to leave us a bad review, don't. That will hurt our feelings and David will cry.
I will, because I am a
He's
giant
soft.
wuss.
He is soft.
I am.
He is soft. But do lie about it. Give us a good review. Tell all your friends. Then regret telling your friends. Then have your friends regret knowing you. That's usually how that goes.
You're great at selling this podcast.
I'm just trying to, like I said at the
bringing
beginning,
it up.
I'm trying to keep the expectations low.
So there's nowhere to go but up.
Exactly.
That is the new slogan for this fucking podcast.
Yeah.
Once we get the banner printed,
This is as bad as it gets. It can only go up from here.
I wonder if when we get our banner printed, if we put that on our banner and then go to conventions with that banner, if it'll be any more eye-catching for people that walk by.
I have some thoughts on how to get it eye-catching. I don't know that it will be
Put
allowed
a
by the
big old
convention.
penis on it?
That's an idea.
Just throwing it out there.
We'll put a pin in that.
I don't know if Vistaprint would print that, but it might violate their terms of service.
We'll see. Speaking of conventions, we do have some plans to attend a couple of upcoming conventions. GalaxyCon in Louisville, which is in November. I think it's the 22nd to the 24th, something like that, I think.
Sounds right.
And then YamaCon over in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, which is, I think, December 6th through the 8th. That'll pretty much round out our year as far as conventions go. So if you see us out there, come say hi, get a free button. Thank you to everybody, again, who came and spoke with us at KaiCon a couple of weeks ago. That was cool, even though we were totally unprepared and looked like a couple of jackasses. That's nothing new either. We'll see everybody at MTAC next year. That was a lot of fun, probably too much fun. Anyway, so that's it. As always, stay geeky, whatever the other shit David says is, and then watch more movies.
Be kind, stay geeky, eat less of cheesecake.
Or, and hear me out, don't do any of that. Just watch more movies because movies make life better.
We can come up with our own sign-off line for the Ghost to the Movies
I
episodes.
think I just did.
What was it again?
You ruined it.
I didn't ruin it. What was it? Watch lots of movies?
Watch more movies because movies make life better.
That's a good one.
I know it is. I thought it up.
All right.
You know what, David? We're done. This podcast is over.
All right. Hey,
I want a new contract.
Everyone go watch more movies because movies makes life better.
You ruined it. How do you do that?
I don't know.